1 year ago today, BuzzFeed News published the Trump-Russia dossier. To much controversy, much criticism, much attention. Gradually, over the course of the last year, Trump-supporting Republicans in the conservative media have tried to turn the whole Russia investigation into a scandal that's about the dossier. Well, today, because Dianne Feinstein took it upon herself to release the transcript of 10 hours of testimony by the founder of Fusion GPS explaining the origin of the dossier and why his firm paid for it, now finally there is, on the record, their own story, their own explanation about who they are, how this thing came to be. So, who is Fusion GPS? How come we have never heard of them before? Are they some big political player? Are they a big partisan firm? Well, here's how they explain who they are. Quote, "We do things like policy disputes, one industry versus another, one company versus another. We don't do a lot of campaign consulting, but every 4 years for the last couple of cycles, we've done some presidential work. Most campaigns don't have the budget for the kind of services that we provide. So we only would do things where people have the resources to pay for a serious piece of research. So we do things like a California initiative or a presidential." Question, and how would you describe your pitch and why would a client need your services? Answer. Generally speaking, people tend to get referred to us when they have a sort of undefined need, like they feel they don't know what happened or they don't know what's going on. Question. You described your work as open-ended and not results-directed. Can you explain a little more what you mean by that? Answer. In general, when people come to us and they tell us what their challenge is, we stipulate that they retain us for 30 days, they agree to pay our fee, they don't tell us what to do, they don't tell us, what result to get. I like to call it a holistic methodology. The reason we do it that way is A, we're professionals and we feel like it's not helpful to have somebody dictating how you do things. But B, if you predetermine the results that you're looking for, you tend to miss things. So that's starting on page 54 of the transcript. That's how they work, broadly speaking. Then on page 62, we learn about how they were engaged to look at Donald Trump during the presidential campaign and what they were looking for. And this is fascinating. Page 62, quote, "It was, broadly speaking, a kind of holistic examination of Donald Trump's business record and his associations, his bankruptcies, his suppliers, offshore or third world suppliers of products that he was selling. It evolved somewhat quickly into issues of relationships to organized crime figures. But, really, the gamut of Donald Trump. What we generally do at the beginning of a case, if it's possible, is to order all the books about the subject from Amazon. So we're not reinventing the wheel, and we know it's been written and said before. This was typical. We ordered every Donald Trump book, and to my surprise, that's a lot of books. I was never very interested in Donald Trump. He was not a serious political figure that I'd ever had any exposure to. He's a New York figure, really. So anyway, we read everything we could read about Donald Trump. Those books cover his divorces, his casinos, his early years dealing with labor unions and mafia figures. His taxes certainly have always been a big issue. Again, it was sort of an unlimited look at, his businesses, his finances, that sort of thing. As a company, we began to look at where his money came from. And that raised a lot of questions. We saw indications that some of the money came from Kazakhstan, among other places, and some of it you just couldn't account for. We also conducted a much broader sort of look at his entire career and his overseas investments in places like Europe and Latin America. It wasn't really a Russia-focused investigation for the first half of it. That was just one component of a broader look at his business career, his finances. We looked at the golf courses and whether they actually made any money and how much debt they had. We looked at the bankruptcies. How could somebody go through so many bankruptcies and still have $1 billion in personal assets? We looked at a lot of things like his tax bills. In the early stage of an investigation, you want to get every lawsuit the guy's ever been in. So, we collected lawsuits from around the country and around the world. Question. And when did you engage Mr. Steele to conduct opposition research on candidate Trump? Answer. I don't specifically recall, but it would have been May or June 2016. Question. And why did you engage Mr. Steele in May or June of 2016? Answer. We had done an enormous amount of work on Trump generally at this point in the project, and we began to drill down on specific areas. Steele was not the only subcontractor we engaged. Other parts of the world required other people. For example, we were interested in the fact that the Trump family was selling merchandise under the Trump brand in the U.S. that was made in sweatshops in Asia and South America, so we needed somebody else for that. There were other things. We were not totally focused on Russia at the time. We'd done a lot of reading and research, and we were drilling down on specific areas. Scotland was another one. What happens when you get to this point in an investigation, when you've gathered all of the public record information and you've begun to exhaust your open source material, you tend to find specialists who can take you further into a subject. I had known Christopher Steele since I left the Wall Street Journal. He was the leading Russianist at MI6 prior to leaving the government, and an extremely well-regarded investigator. I would say that is broadly why I asked him to see what he could find out about Donald Trump's business activities in Russia. Question. So in May or June 2016, you hired Steele to find out what he could about Trump's business activities in Russia. Did something in particular trigger that assignment? Answer. No, I don't think I could point to something in particular as a trigger. I mean, the basis for the request was he'd made a number of trips to Russia and had talked about doing a number of business deals. But he never did one. And that struck me as a little bit odd and calling for an explanation. We didn't know. It was opaque what Donald Trump had been doing on these business trips to Russia. We didn't know what he was doing there. So we gave Chris a sort of assignment. We said, see if you can find out what Donald Trump has been doing on these trips to Russia. That's only up to page 82. And that's where it gets really interesting. I'll be right back. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island is going to be live with us here in just a moment. That was him today on the Senate floor giving a barn burner of a speech about what Russia did and how the congressional investigations into it are being diverted and thwarted by the Republican-led Congress, including by the Republicans who are trying to turn the Russia scandal into a scandal about the Trump-Russia dossier, which blew wide open today on the eve of the one-year anniversary of the day the dossier was first published by BuzzFeed News. So today, surprise, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California decided to unilaterally make the decision to release the 10-hour transcript of testimony from Fusion GPS's founder Glenn Simpson from when the Judiciary Committee interviewed him about his firm and its role in the dossier, a dossier that has become central to the Republicans and the White House's pushback against the investigation. Now, one of the things that is a revelation in these transcripts today is that Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele apparently didn't know. They had no idea that they were going to find what they found about Donald Trump when Steele first started making his reports. So from page 143 of the transcript that was released today. This is Glenn Simpson speaking. So the purpose of this, he means the purpose of engaging Christopher Steele, was to see if we could learn more about his business dealings in Russia. What came back was something very different and obviously more alarming, which had to do with, which outlined a political conspiracy and a much broader set of issues than the ones we basically went looking for. Initially, we didn't know what to do with this. Page 147. So this was unusual in what we were doing here, and it's not what I had in mind when I asked Chris Steele to begin collecting information on this. My expectation was something a lot less interesting than this, more along the lines of a typical corruption investigation. So they asked Steele to look into Trump's business trips to Russia, his business dealings in Russia. They got this information collected by Christopher Steele, which Fusion says was not at all what they were expecting to get. But then once they had it, they had to decide what to do with it. They were unprepared, according to Fusion GPS. And then we get like this human drama between the guy from Fusion, the ex-journalist Glenn Simpson, who's testifying here, and Chris Steele, this intelligence guy who he has engaged to find this, oh my God, what did you just find about Donald Trump? Quote, page 159. After the first memo, Chris said he was very concerned about whether this represented a national security threat. He said he wanted to. He said he thought we were obligated to tell someone in government, in our government, about this information. He thought from his perspective there was an issue, a security issue, about whether a presidential candidate was being blackmailed. So he said we should tell the FBI. It's a national security issue. I didn't originally agree or disagree. I just put it off. I said I needed to think about it. Then he raised it again with me. I don't remember the exact sequence of these events, but my recollection is that I questioned how we would do that, because I didn't know anybody there that I could report something like this to and be believed, and I didn't really think it was necessarily appropriate for me to do that. In any event, he said, meaning Steele said, don't worry about that. I know the perfect person. I have a contact there. They'll listen to me. They know who I am. I'll take care of it. I said, okay. I agreed. It's potentially a crime in progress. So, if we can do that in the most appropriate way, I said it was okay for him to do that. Question: who was involved in discussions about whether it was appropriate to take either the memo or the information in the memo to the FBI? Answer: it was Chris and me. Question: you said you asked for some time to think it over. What in particular did he articulate to you that was of significant national security concern to indicate that it should be taken to the FBI? Answer: His concern, which is something counterintelligence people deal with a lot, whether or not there was blackmail going on, whether a political candidate was being blackmailed or had been compromised. He honed in on this issue of blackmail as being a significant national security issue. Joining us now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, a Democrat who serves on the Judiciary Committee, who made a big public stink about the fact that these transcripts ought to be released. Sir, thank you very much for your time tonight. I really appreciate you being here.
Good to be with you.